Howdy, welcome to another week of Canon Calls. I am your host, Jake McAtee, and this week I had the pleasure of speaking with George Gilder. George is a prolific author of many books that range from work on gender and sexuality to economics to technology. He really is all over the place. I hope to capture that in this interview and talk to him about not only his own life, but sort of the life of his works and what precipitated those. As you can tell, when the episode starts, we started mid-conversation. He jumped into being interesting right away. So just know as it starts, we are mid-conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Go read as much George Gilder as you can. So without further ado, meet George Gilder.
I think it's a matter of dimensions. C.S. Lewis wrote about how you can be in a kind of as if you're in a two-dimensional universe. You're living in a landscape painting, and you have a theory of a two-dimensional universe, and you understand all pigments and all composition in a completely materialist, two-dimensional way.
Right.
And you can never imagine that, in fact, this two-dimensional image is just the vaguest reflection of a vast 3 and 4 and 11-dimensional universe beyond it. The atheist lives in that kind of materialist trap.
That's right. We'll just go ahead and jump in, George, because this is already getting to be too fun. But I imagine there's a lot in terms of your work on information that you could pull from Lewis's transposition as well. Have you found that to be true as well?
I call Lewis one of the great information theorists.
Interesting.
And I think he actually is. And transposition is at the heart of it. His rejection of superstition.
Right.
The belief that everything is chemistry and physics and can be reduced to this reductionist mindset that today is depriving us of faces and reducing us to sort of neuter kind of, but not having any way of transcending it, and thus not having any humanity, being creative in the image of our creator.
Well, I trust, George, that you are standing firm out there, as you called it, in Massachusetts, and you're being anti-fragile and the rest. Is that the case?
That's the case.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. As everyone has heard us sort of mid-conversation, welcome to Canon Calls, sir. George Gilder, special guest. It's an honor to have you on. George is an American investor, author, economist. He's a futurist and co-founder of the Discovery Institute. George, that was the one sentence. I did my best to get your byline in one sentence. Did I miss anything important?
Well, thank you. You did a good job.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. George, I want to start kind of at the beginning with you. First, though, can you tell us who you are and where you came from?
Gosh, I'm from Tyringham, Massachusetts, and I've lived here virtually all my life, although I was actually born in New York. My mother lived in New York for a while, but I during the Second World War. But my family all comes from Tyringham, Massachusetts, and I was brought up on a dairy farm here. And on the dairy farm, I used to clean out the calves and muck out the stables and get hay from the fields. And I got a sense of immune systems and how they work. You got to educate your immune systems by exposing them to various viruses and other threats, not by concealing them or trying to isolate yourself. And I became an economist really based on information theory.
Okay.
And information theory is an important science of the 20th century, and it's crucial to understand its hierarchical structure. You can't explain higher level things by understanding lower level things.
Okay.
And that we have a hierarchical universe. And this is fundamental to information theory. And materialists deny really the significance of information. They think information is just an expression of material relations, which in turn are accidental and thus ultimately meaningless. So in the end, they deprive the human beings of meaning and purpose. And that's the message. But I got it through a long and road through the Harvard University, the U.S. Marine Corps, and writing books in the beginning about sex and family, and proceeding on to writing about poverty as the result of family breakdown, and then recognizing that poverty really has been the human condition throughout the existence of the race, and that what really needs to be explained is wealth. And it seems to me that wealth is best explained by creativity in the image of the creator. Human beings were designed to be creative in the image of their creator. And that's sort of been the fundamental thesis of all my works that are about economics, sex, family, technology,
okay,
money.
No, it's perfect. Perfect. So one thing before you're giving spoilers to your life, George, that I was trying to, walk people to, but you're full of spoilers. One thing I wanted to ask, so as I look at your books, the first one coming out in 1966 with Bruce Chapman, and I saw that you, and I think we talked a little bit while you were here, that you essentially recanted some of the ideas in the book. So that was really interesting to me in terms of you started somewhere, and then I'd love to hear kind of what changed, that being your first book, what changed your mind about those certain ideas?
The Party That Lost Its Head, which I wrote with Bruce Chapman, who was my roommate at Harvard. And we started a magazine together called Advance that was a liberal Republican magazine.
Okay.
And so I was what I called myself a progressive Republican, chiefly because I opposed Barry Goldwater's argument against the Civil Rights Bill.
Okay.
That was really the reason we called ourselves progressive Republicans. We were in favor of the civil rights movement, but we also, from the beginning, believed that the civil rights movement should be based on the Constitution and on the overcoming the remnants of slavery. Congress was allowed to make laws that overcame the residue of slavery. And that was what civil rights should be about. It should be rectifying that historic error, not establishing new principles of equality that of result and new government bureaucracies and also extending these affirmative action not just to blacks, but to a majority of the population. All women were represented to be victims and thus in need of affirmative action. And so at the heart of the Party That Lost Its Head, I'm not going to say I was everything in that book was right. I mean, I haven't read it for 25, 40 years, probably, maybe 50. So I'm not sure just what's in it, but that was the heart of it, that we were for civil rights, but we were not for this massive equal employment opportunity commission, affirmative action rules,
Sure.
Title IX, sex role regimes. And we just, so...
Understood.
So the next book I wrote was called Sexual Suicide, which opposed the parts of the civil rights movement that were pertaining to the majority of human beings.
So sexual suicide, it eventually became Men in Marriage, correct?
Yes.
in the next decade?
I wrote 3 or 4 books on this subject.
Okay.
And the final one sort of summed it up, and it was called Men and Marriage. And I pretended that Men and Marriage was a reissue of Sexual Suicide because the publisher of Sexual Suicide was trying to stop me from publishing another book.
Got it.
I don't want to go through all the contractual details, but anyway, the result was I wrote what was essentially a new book called Men and Marriage, and pretended that it wasn't a new book. It was just a reissue of Sexual Suicide. But Men and Marriage really sums up my themes on family life, and I think it's being proven right every day. You break down families, and the whole culture dissolves. The whole economy dissolves into kind of fragmentary futility.
What was the response at the time from critics about Sexual Suicide?
Well, I got Pig of the Year award from the National Organization for Women. I thought that was pretty good. I went around the country trumpeting myself as Pig of the Year. I was brought up on a farm. I understood the virtue of pigs and their importance in social order. The result of this, they were giving Pig of the Year awards every year, and everybody would crawl away and hide after they received it. And I ended it. They never gave another Pig of the Year award.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. So you are the reigning forever champion. Yeah. Now, what exactly, you mentioned it a little bit, the thesis there and the works at that time. You mentioned the 4 other books-ish. What was the central thesis there that they're reacting to, that you would earn such an honor as Pig of the Year?
That families are the foundation of civilized society, and that they're based on the differences between the sexes. And you try to eliminate the differences between the sexes, and you erode and undermine families, and ultimately result in a plague of family breakdown or even failure to form families, and ultimately decline in population. That population itself is population growth and is jeopardized by sexual suicide, as I called it, the effort to deny the differences that make life meaningful and marriage feasible and procreation successful.
Right.
Go forth and multiply, and we're now increasingly dividing rather than multiplying. And I think that's a real threat to humanity. I'm
curious, since that book has come out and now, what have you seen as the sort of as far as the critics are concerned, the feminist movement and trajectory since? For example, if this book came out today, do you think the blowback would be in kind to what you received, or would it be worse, or do you think it might go along better? How do you think? I
don't know. It's still in print after 50 years or more.
Right.
And so it would be regarded as utterly outrageous. I mean, and people would try to cancel it and try to cancel me, but they've been trying to do that for some time. And I've managed to hang in there. And I've got more readers than ever. I have something like 150,000 readers a day.
Wow.
On my daily prophecy.
Now,
and I don't write a lot about this, but I mention it. It's when I wrote that book, 20% of Blacks were born in female-headed families. And I said that this was, I was following Daniel Patrick Moynihan's insight that the breakdown of the Black family was threatened the Black community in America. And And now some 70% of blacks are born in female-headed families. And it clearly has caused, everybody now is claiming that the civil rights movement somehow failed and that racism still is prevalent and that this is a fatal flaw in the whole American dream and establishment. So I think I was probably right.
Right. Right. Now, one of the other books that I think that at least I'm most familiar with that came out in 1981 was Wealth and Poverty. This particular thesis, I'll say something and you tell me if that's how you feel as well. But I feel like Wealth and Poverty gave conservatives an apologetic of sorts, essentially to not be embarrassed of or guilty about the free market. Do you agree with that? And then second, what were you seeing at the time that basically encouraged you to write that book?
It's not particularly, I don't like to think of it chiefly as a negative issue, giving conservatives a reason not to feel vulnerable about their beliefs. I mean, I think it was affirming.
No, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. You gave, they're usually...
It was a celebration of capitalism, yes, rather than a case for capitalism or an apology for capitalism. Irving Kristol, who was a famous Wall Street Journal columnist, had just written a book called Two Cheers for Capitalism. And I said I thought that was wrong. Capitalism deserves three cheers. He believed that capitalism was based on greed in some sense, or that it was based on mere selfishness. And I believed that argument was really preposterous, that selfishness is ubiquitous in human life. But capitalists, in order to succeed, first have to understand the needs of others. And then they have to forego consumption, their own indulgence, in order to save, in order to accumulate capital, to invest in ventures that will succeed or fail in proportion as they respond to the needs of others. And then the capitalist has to collaborate with others. Everything about capitalism, I believe, was ultimately altruistic. That is, it entails an orientation toward the needs of others. And thus, it wasn't inimical to the great Christian, Judeo-Christian truths. It actually was a fulfillment of them. And that was really the original insight, that there was the widespread belief that somehow capitalism was an incentive system. It was just a matter of carrots and sticks that induced people to go to work and to build things. And somehow by an invisible hand, the collective self-interest of individuals led to some common interest of all. It was a kind of twisted argument that I thought was fundamentally wrong. The essential Christian beliefs are fulfilled in a capitalist society. Of course, if individual moral codes and principles are not upheld, a capitalist society will tend to dissolve. In other words, greed doesn't lead to success and riches. Greed leads us by an invisible hand to an ever expanding welfare state, as greed is the desire for unearned benefits.
Right.
It's and the best way to get unearned benefits is to collaborate with government. And crony capitalism is a disease of capitalism. It's not a fulfillment of it.
I think you're exactly right. And one thing that we've talked about on here before is that conservatives seem particularly given to things like embarrassment, or being like, well, it is it may be run by greed, but it's the best thing we have for now, or anything that the left sort of barbs them with, they somewhat believe, and then they end up reacting to it and sounding shrill. And I think you're right. Your book sort of gave them a positive vision outside of that little back and forth. And
transcending it.
Yes. And has that been your experience with conservatives in terms of just getting caught up in that back and forth? Do you see them tripping over themselves like that in other places besides economics?
I think with regard to, they're all twisting themselves into knots about sexual issues.
Right.
The absurdity that there are 68 sexes or whatever it is that Facebook is cataloged.
Right.
I mean, the Democrats, really, I think they're going to regret this. This is not going to look good in the future. That the first thing the Democrats did when they really took control in 2021 was to have a benediction or grace or something where all men and all women.
Yeah, what a start.
And they banished all use of genderized words. I mean, you have to say parent. You can't say father and mother. You have to say sibling rather than sister or brother. Right. That all gender-defined identities are banished from the law. This is a real sign of intellectual idiocy. It's just it's a decline and fall. So I'm really kind of grateful to them for doing that when they took office. I mean, it showed what we've been saying about them was really true. I mean,
right.
I mean, this is the whole. Nobody got up and protested that I hear about. I mean, no Democrats said, "Oh, what a ridiculous thing to do." They're all intimidated by the terrible collapse and corruption of the university system, and that's really the heart of it, I think. Which is why I was so happy to come to Moscow and see you guys starting new universities and new schools and really revitalizing the culture out there.
Well, it's first steps.
That's Moscow, Idaho.
That's right, not Russia.
Assume everybody knows it.
Now, before we move on from Wealth and Poverty, you had some very interesting folks that loved it and then also that detracted. Can you tell us about the effect that the book had on the Reagan administration?
Wealth and Poverty was a worldwide bestseller. It was just an astonishing development. I mean, President Reagan adopted it and had it distributed to everybody in his cabinet, and it became a global bestseller. It had Samizdat versions in communist China and Russia. It was just and it was the number one book in France for 6 months. I mean, it was just an amazing success. And so yes, people said the Laffer curve is disproven and it's trickle down economics. I mean, all these, what I regarded to be absurd claims. And so I think, I really think Wealth and Poverty was almost complete success. And it didn't, and it was such a success that I decided to really stop focusing on economics and to learn new subjects. I decided to learn technology. I saw that the microchip was the most important technological breakthrough of our era, beyond nuclear power. And the microchip showed that whole worlds in a grain of sand. I mean, the microchip was made of sand, and yet it allowed the creation of whole cathedrals of information and ideas. And this was really my subject for the rest of my life. I've been writing how human beings, creative in the image of their creator, could turn sand into cathedrals of mind. And that really has been a theme. And it's also because microchips are still a foundation of the world economy. China and the United States today are really struggling over the intellectual property underlying the creation of microchips. And I think we're making a terrible mistake of trying to use our technology to stop China. I think that's a futile and stupid thing to do. But my insight in Wealth and Poverty, just in passing, but in Microcosm and Telecosm and all those books about microchips and fiber optics and the electromagnetic spectrum, all these technologies, is vindicated today. The world is really struggling over who's going to dominate the next generation of microchip.
Right. Now, real quick, before we move from Wealth and Poverty, Ayn Rand was not a fan, as I understand it.
Yes, that is her last speech.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Her last speech she ever gave, I gather, was at the Ford Hall Forum in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And she devoted it to an attack on wealth and poverty and the idea that somehow selfishness was bad and that somehow I was describing capitalism as altruistic, and this somehow rendered me as a socialist in some sense, a collectivist.
Okay.
It was I think she was a great woman, but her great and fatal flaw was her atheism, which I think is a really crippling idea. By the way, the Discovery Institute has just published a new book by Steve Meyer, who is head of their science, called The Return of the God Hypothesis. And it's a major new book by Steve Meyer.
Okay.
Which shows that really that science, as when people talk about science, what C.S. Lewis called scientism,
right,
is really an irrational faith. They believe in things like infinitely multiple parallel universes and all these bizarre and preposterous ideas in order to save them from recognizing the possibility of God.
Right.
And Steve does an excellent job in The Return of the God Hypothesis of showing how scientists are increasingly coming to understand that science is not coherent and if it's all based on the materialist superstition, the belief that there's nothing there but atoms and molecules.
Exactly. So now, I hope folks are keeping just a list of books to be looking into. So add that one by Steve Meyer.
Yeah, Steve Meyer. He's a scientist from Cambridge University in England, and he's the head of the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute.
There we go. Okay.
He's just...
Now, going back to the microchip, did you hand President Reagan his first microchip? Was that the story I remember?
I did. That was one of my, I think in 1985, I handed Ronald Reagan a 64K Micron DRAM.
Okay.
That's a dynamic random access memory chip. And I told him that this technology was ultimately going to make possible strategic defense initiative, possible to intercept incoming missiles, and that it wouldn't require a vast software program that people were saying would be necessary, that instead it could be incorporated in microchips and nose cones of all interceptors. And so you have a distributed defense. And I think that influenced Reagan. He later went to Moscow,
Russia.
The other Moscow in Russia. There's a Moscow in Russia. You may not know about it, but
That's right.
Reagan gave a speech at the Moscow State University, a famous speech. Brett Baier, the TV journalist, wrote a book about it recently. And it was written by my cousin, Josh Gilder, who was a speechwriter for Reagan.
Okay.
And it was, I was certainly involved with it because it was all about microchips. It really did. I really did have an impact on the Reagan administration and its recognition that this technology would be crucial to the future, not only of defense, but also of our national prosperity.
The 80s, it seems like, was a real transition moment. As you mentioned, you kind of put the pen down on economics at that point, and sort of, would you say that kind of started off what most have called your futurist career?
Yes, because I really did predict that the microchip would change everything. And that gave me a reputation of the future as a futurist. I wasn't really the first to do it. I think Alvin Toffler's book, Third Wave, he didn't focus on microchips. He focused on computers. And I think the microchip was fundamental. So maybe I was one of the first to see that the microchip changed, technology all consisted of pushing and pulling and exploding matter from the outside. And the microchip was the first technology that was based on manipulating matter from the inside. And this made possible, as Richard Feynman wrote, of just tremendous complex machines made at the nanoscale, billionth of a meter. This has really been the heart of all our economic developments since the 1980s, has been this discovery that you could manipulate matter from the inside and create vast machines with trillions of moving parts on tiny little grains of sand. And that's really been the great revelation of technology since the 1980s.
Now, you did quite a bit in that space, and up till even 2018, when you wrote a book called Life After Google, The Fall of Big Data and the Rise of the Blockchain Economy. That had a really interesting story when we talked about its international influence. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the surprising thing about it, wealth and poverty succeeded in the United States first, and that was it. And then it went overseas.
Right.
The surprise with Life After Google was its reception in China.
Okay.
The Chinese really adopted it, and it was named by a major Chinese literary institute as the best social science book published in China last year in 1918. It was just an amazing thing, and it became a bestseller in China.
Wow.
And a bigger bestseller than it was in the United States. And it's been a real bestseller, a good seller ever since it came out more than 2 years ago. It's almost 2.5 years ago now.
What was the thesis of that book? Like, what about the thesis of that book do you think made it so successful, not only internationally, but it also had domestic success as well?
Yeah. Well, it was, one of the top sellers in Amazon for 2 years. It was the top seller on cryptocurrencies. It essentially saw that the blockchain, this new kind of database that was incorporated in Bitcoin and made it possible to have a new internet architecture based on verifiable time-stamped facts and transactions. And this new technology would enable not only a new internet architecture that isn't hacked thousands of times a day, but also a new global money that couldn't be hacked by central banks all the time, stealing from the future in order to pay for consumption now, which is really the basic strategy of most of the central banks of the world. So it showed that the blockchain is a fundamental new technology that is going to transform the world and will be a technology as significant in its own way as the microchip that makes it possible. The blockchain is only possible because of the vast expansion of that memory technology I handed to Ronald Reagan back in 1985. Then it was 64K DRAM, that's 64,000 bits. And now it's 64 billion bits you can put in one DRAM.
Wow.
And so it's million-fold rise in the capacity of memory chips. And this means that you can, rather than having to have a financial system, for example, like a Visa, MasterCard, or all controlled in some central database somewhere, instead you can have all the transactions recorded and time-stamped immutably in every node of the network, every computer in the network. So it means that you create an unhackable structure both for money and for information. If you try to change something, you can't just change it one place, because the same facts or the same transactions or monetary values are recorded on computers all around the global network. You got to control all the computers in order to change one timestamp fact. So this is a breakthrough that both creates an internet that can't be manipulated by Twitter or whatever from day to day, and also a new financial foundation that is comparable to the foundation previously supplied by gold. When we had the gold standard, we had a single money around the world.
Right.
And now there's a hope for cryptocurrencies that can form a similarly stable and immutable money around the world. I have some Bitcoin didn't quite do it. It almost did it, but it didn't quite do it. And Bitcoin is a speculative asset, really, rather than a potential replacement for fiat currencies like the dollar. But I believe that using cryptocurrencies, a new monetary system is going to emerge that escapes the manipulation of central bankers and governments. And the idea that money is a sovereign tool of governments is just misconceived. All through the history of the gold standard, when money was gold, there was really only one measuring stick of value, and that was gold. And in 1971, we broke away from the gold standard. And it hasn't been until the emergence of cryptocurrencies over the last few years that there's a real opportunity to create a new money as a measuring stick that doesn't change, rather than a magic wand for central banks to.
Right. Now, lest anybody balk at the Life After Google, imagining a world without Google, you did write the book Life After Television in 1990, and I imagine a lot of those predictions are coming in just right. So,
well, the Life After Television was right.
Now,
it wasn't right. It wasn't right in every detail.
Right.
But it's essentially right that what we're doing today is part of this emergence of new media that are distributed around the world and are controlled by their users rather than by some top-down centralized power.
Now, looking at, you mentioned before that you, while there's been this sort of tech side of your career, but early on it was a lot of family and economics side of your career that they might seem disparate on the surface, but that you did sort of have a central thesis running throughout. As I thought about that question, I thought maybe one thing, as I've read your works across that spectrum, is creativity and freedom are the most important aspects of your work. Is that true? Did I get it?
You got it. That is really true. And since then, I've come to interpret this through information theory. And Claude Shannon defined information as surprise.
That's good.
And a Princeton economist named Albert Hirschman, wrote that you couldn't really predict economic progress because creativity always comes as a surprise to us. And this means that all deterministic schemes, top-down, collectivist, materialist schemes, are doomed because all economic progress is based on unexpected developments. Claude Shannon measures information itself by the degrees of freedom of the person who transmitted the message. A message can be surprising and unexpected in proportion to the freedom that its sender has to say unexpected things. If everything I say today you already know, then no information is being transmitted. And this was Claude Shannon's great insight, that information is measured not by its determinism, but by its surprisal, its unexpectedness, what he called its entropy. And so all these themes of my analysis sort of have converged in information theory now. And I'm writing a new book called Life After Capitalism, which really shows how information theory is both affirms my religious insights and my political and economic views. Capitalism is not an incentive system, a system of carrots and sticks. It's an information system driven by human creativity in the image of our creator. And that's sort of the theme that I'm now pursuing and really have been pursuing from the beginning.
Right. It does seem like your books have all been leading to that particular book, a place where you can say it all at the same time. As we kind of wrap up here, one question I did have, we recently, in the last few months or so, had a William F. Buckley biographer on, and you had been, I think your first time was with Wealth and Poverty. You can correct me on that, but you had been on Firing Line, his discussion show, essentially. Is there any good William F. Buckley stories that you have?
Well, I was on Firing Line a couple times, but I also wrote a biographical article about Bill Buckley way back in the 1960s in Playboy. And a magazine of all things. Okay. And when I proposed the article to Buckley, he said, "Oh, well, I'm just going out to see Barry Goldwater. Why don't you come with me?" So he took me out to Scottsdale. I flew with him, interviewing him on the plane to Phoenix, and went to Scottsdale and spent several days with Goldwater. And this was after Goldwater had just lost the election, and I'd written The Party That Lost Its Head. And Buckley and Goldwater were both so generous and intelligent and understanding about it. It was really the opposite of the political environment that we're in today, where if you write the wrong thing, you get canceled. I didn't get canceled. I got put up by Barry in his son's room, and I wrote quite a celebration of Buckley in the Playboy article, and I'm quite pleased. It was a good article, and I also met Claire Booth Luce out there during that visit.
Okay, she
was a friend of Goldwater's and a great conservative lady and wife of Henry Luce of Time Life, and she was also a great Christian.
Okay,
and she believed that the world was coming to an end, that everything was tragic, and we had quite a debate, and that debate was also described in the article. So it was I had after that I had an interesting relationship with Buckley for the rest of his life.
Now, as we move into the 2020s and the rest of this particular century, do your futurist capacities extend to the social side, not just tech? Where do you see us? How do you see the next few years and largely the rest of the century? Is it?
Well, I think that the remnant groups have to recover the civilization. I mean, they're now preserving it through something of a dark age.
Right.
But I think capitalism is moving on, and Christianity triumphs, and together they can perpetuate our civilization in the face of a real widespread attack on it.
Right.
And I also think there's a lot of hope in China. We have a hostile regime in China today, but nonetheless, there is much more freedom in China than it would seem to be from the surface. I mean, they don't allow political freedom in China, but there's a lot of free people in China. And a lot of businesses, very creative businesses in China. They have more business starts than we do. So in some ways, China is the leading capitalist power. And this is, there are a lot of ironies and conflicts. But if we uphold our essential faith and pursue it, creative in the image of our Creator, I think we can prevail.
George, you've been very kind by offering us this time. I hope to see you back. We'd love to have you back out, not only in Moscow, but back on the show as well. So
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Everyone can find your stuff. You can see those Firing Line episodes. They are on YouTube, as well as finding your books. Do you have any preference on where folks pick up your books?
Amazon's the easiest place to find them all. But you can, I mean, it depends. I mean, they're trying to close bookstores these days.
That's right. You write daily. Do you want to let folks know where they can find you there?
It's gilderpress.com as you can reach me.
Okay.
And that's my Agora daily prophecy.
Excellent.
And I write it almost every day. I've done some 200,000 words of it in the last year and a half or so. And now I'm writing a book, so the dailies are getting a little less regular than they were. But and Life After Google still tells the story of the opportunities that blockchain presents, and the triumph of Bitcoin and Ethereum, and the flaws of Bitcoin, and the possibilities are all explained in Life After Google. So I'm still pleased with that. And Life After Capitalism is really developing the information theory of economics as a way to show how technology continues to advance even when the monetary systems collapse. Wealth is knowledge, growth is learning, and money is time, finally. And those are all explained in the information theory of economics. which is introduced quite fully in Life After Google.
Which leads us right back, to Lewis, Till We Have Faces, and Transposition Essay, which means we've come full circle, sir. Thank you again, and we are eager to have you back.
Thank you so much.